Hi, everyone. Welcome to our special activity for Quebec's Week for Persons with Disabilities, our Lunch and Learn on Accessibility in Research Labs. My name is Marie-Lou Daudier. I'm the Senior Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisor at the D2R Initiative at McGill University. This event is happening thanks to a great collaboration with collaborators across McGill University and from the Quebec Interuniversity Network for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So before we start, I would like to share a few considerations as we're having an equity, diversity, and inclusion event. I think it's important to share that I use the pronouns she and her, sharing the pronouns that we refer to in LinkedIn titles, email signatures, or when we speak at events like today are all ways to normalize gender diversity and the fact that our physical appearance does not necessarily determine the gender that we identify with. And as we are also in Pride Month, I think it's important to think about that as well. Also, I would like to share that there's no one that has registered with visual impairment, but if you're hosting an accessible event, it could be interesting if some people mention that they have visual impairment to share what's going on the screen. Like you could share that you're appearing on the screen, like myself as a Black woman with curly hair, so that just gives a more inclusive experience to everyone around the screen. And also, I would like to share a few words in French. Alors, je vais juste mentionner que l'événement tel que vous l'avez vu est un événement en anglais. Cependant, c'est possible d'avoir une traduction en simultané. Donc, pour le faire, vous avez juste à cliquer l'icône CC sur la plateforme Zoom et ça va vous donner accès à une traduction qui va pas être parfaite, bien sûr, mais ça peut vous aider quand même à mieux comprendre l'événement. Also, I would like to share a land acknowledgement. The Detour Initiative at McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. This land acknowledgement is particularly important in the context of D2R because one core component of D2R is Indigenous health research, and it is very important for us to think about the intersection of different diversity markers, including the Indigenous identity and what we're doing if we truly want to develop RNA therapies that are accessible and for everyone. So I invite you to think about that as we are going through the webinar. And so I spoke to you about it being Quebec's Week for Persons with Disabilities. If you don't know about this event, it happens every year from June 1st to June 7th. And the goal is really to raise awareness to have more social participation of people with disabilities in different spaces. And I'm so happy that we developed something this year that is very concrete with an accessibility toolkit that we will speak to you about today to really break barriers in our own research environments. And it is really nice to see that there's many people on this call today. There's people from Concordia University, from UQTR, Université de Sherbrooke, ERCM. There's people beyond McGill today, so we're really happy that we'll build that together. And how this all happened actually was through a conversation that we had with Maria, one of the speakers that you see on the screen. She really contacted me and she mentioned having different needs to make her research lab more accessible. And we thought, let's have this conversation beyond ourselves and let's maybe share good practices across McGill. And we were like, no, let's be even more bold than that. Let's put it out there even beyond McGill. And this is how we happen to have this conversation today. So the idea for this conversation is to really start by opening remarks where we'll guide you through some definitions and key concepts with the posture to have to really integrate the toolkit. Afterwards, we'll speak about legal considerations, and then we'll have a fireside chat where we'll speak about really the different sections of the accessibility toolkit. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce you to one of my dear friends. She's also the founder and executive director of the Réseau québécois interuniversitaire en équité, diversité et inclusion, also called the Quebec Interuniversity Network for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And Viviana, I would just like to share to everyone, she's someone that truly believes in collaboration to do things in a meaningful way. So I think it's really nice that we're able to have her to speak, to share the first words. Viviana, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marilou, for the nice words. I'm delighted to be here today and to contribute to the launch of this really cool practical tool for research teams. Like Marilou mentioned at the Réseau québécois pour l'équité, pour l'équité, la diversité et l'inclusion, we work closely with institutions, researchers, practitioners committed to advancing equity, diversity, inclusion in our ecosystem. So, through the different projects and collaborations we have and we've had, people do recognize the importance of accessibility as a priority, but many teams still lack practical guidance on how to make research environments truly accessible. So, this toolkit built under the initiative of D2R and McGill University in collaboration with the Rikidzi was to help to address that gap. So what our goal was not to create a perfect or exhaustive resource, but rather a practical and actionable tool that can support research teams in taking meaningful steps towards accessibility. So why does accessibility matter in research? I think I'm pretty sure you're aware of that. But accessibility is fundamental to equity, diversity, and inclusion and excellence in research. And when we talk about excellence in research, we talk about inclusive excellence and not necessarily meritocracy. So research thrives when diverse perspectives, experiences, and talents are able to fully contribute. But many barriers continue to exist in the research ecosystems. So these barriers can limit opportunities for researchers, students, and staff with visible and invisible disabilities. And therefore, it does penalize institutions from benefiting from their valuable contributions. So just last year, we finished a project with the Fonds de Recherche du Québec in relation to the access of funding for researchers, professors, and graduate students. Many of the participants outlined the physical barriers such as laboratory layouts or equipment in their institutions, but others, for example, also outlined the technological, procedural, and communicational barriers. And these conversations reminded us that accessibility still remains an important challenge in our universities. So I hope that the key messages we take away today is that accessibility is much more about compliance. Of course, legal obligations matter, and Jad is going to talk about that, but accessibility should not be approached simply as a requirement to fulfill. Instead, it should be viewed as an intentional commitment to creating environments where people can participate, contribute, and thrive. So to support that commitment, it's useful to revisit a few key definitions that are available in the toolkit. I think, Marilou, you're gonna put them up. Thank you, Marilou. So if we start with accessibility, it means ensuring that people with disabilities can fully participate in all aspects of life, having access to all aspects of society on an equal basis and on an equal and equitable basis with others. Then, when we talk about barrier, it's anything that is physical, technological, organizational, communicational, attitudinal that hinders full participation in society of people with different types of disabilities. And then when we talk about disability itself, it's not necessarily a characteristic of an individual, but we should rather see it like a disability that often emerges through the interaction between a person and the barriers that are present in their environment. So, this perspective is important because it shifts the question. Instead of asking how individuals should adapt to existing systems, we could begin by asking how systems, environments, and practices can be designed to support a wider range of people. And another important message of this toolkit is that accessibility is a shared responsibility. It is not solely the responsibility of individuals with disabilities, accessibility officers, or EDI professionals. Accessibility belongs to everyone in research, starting from PIs, research staff, to graduate students, trainees, and administrators. I think, Marilou, you could stop sharing. You already presented the three definitions that are in the toolkit. But the good news is that creating more accessible research spaces does not have to be overwhelming. I mean, sometimes we're just overwhelmed. This toolkit uh, that we could see that there's many accessibility improvements that could be simple, it could be low cost and beneficial to everyone. Of course, when we talk about accessibility, when we talk about EDI, we cannot aim perfection because it's always a progress. So every conversation, every adjustment, and every effort to remove a barrier can make a meaningful difference. So I hope this toolkit encourages to move more from a reactive approach to a proactive approach, and I hope it helps build environments where accessibility is a main focus for everyone. So for people with disabilities and no disabilities. So I wish you a great webinar and very happy that you guys are here, and hope you enjoy reading the toolkit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viviana, for setting up the stage so well. I think you're giving motivation to people to do things in a meaningful way and purposeful way. So now I would like for us to shift to another important foundational piece as we are talking about accessibility. I think we talked about the posture with Viviana, the different definitions, but it's also important to understand the basic legal aspects. So for that, I would like to present to you Jade, my colleague who works at McGill at the Office of Mediation and Reporting. She is an advisor of mediation and investigation. So Jade, the floor is yours. I will share the screen also.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marilou. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be part of this conversation today. Among other things, my role mainly consists of carrying out investigations and mediations on campus under McGill's policy on harassment and discrimination. Now, while my background is not exactly scientific, I was invited to contribute to this initiative to bring an equity and human rights perspective to the conversation, as accessibility and inclusion are central to my work. It's also a topic that is especially meaningful to me on a personal level. Now, through my work, I've seen firsthand how barriers to accessibility are often built into environments in subtle ways, yet still significantly shape who can access and participate in academic spaces. So as Bibiana mentioned, an accessibility approach invites us to shift our lens and to examine how our systems, policies, and physical spaces may unintentionally exclude individuals, particularly in highly structured environments like labs. Ideally, this reflection happens early so that barriers can be proactively identified and addressed before they lead to harm or formal complaints. And now, so to help navigate conversations around disability diagnoses and accommodations, I'll briefly outline some key legal considerations today that I thought were relevant. And just before I jump into this, I'll just note that these elements will be addressed and explained in the toolkit, so there's no need to worry about taking notes. Because it can be quite dense. I'll start by briefly discussing disclosure. Now, the general principle is that individuals are not required to disclose a diagnosis in order to be entitled to respectful and equitable treatment. Employees should not be pressured to share medical information. However, employers may request information about functional limitations to assess accommodation needs. In a university context, students usually need to provide medical documentation to access formal accommodations. And at McGill, the focus is really on how a condition affects the student's day-to-day functioning. So that may be required. Now, building on these considerations around disclosure, I'll turn to the duty to accommodate, which is the core obligation. Under Quebec human rights principles, individuals have the right to equality and to be free from discrimination, including on the basis of disability. The duty to accommodation arises when a rule, policy, or practice, intentional or not, creates a disadvantage linked to a protected ground. Accommodation may involve adapting practices, policies, environments, or providing exceptions or adjustments in a flexible way. The key principle is that equal treatment is not always equitable, and this is what we can call indirect discrimination. Sometimes different treatment is required to ensure equal participation in spaces. It's also important to note that the duty to accommodate is not unlimited, which brings us to the concept of undue hardship. Accommodation must be provided up to the point of undue hardship when it interferes with the proper functioning of the organization or creates significant health or safety risks or infringes on the rights of others. The assessment is really context specific. It can include operational requirements, available resources, whether reasonable alternatives have already been explored. What's really important is that the burden is on the organization to demonstrate undue hardship with objective evidence. Ultimately, these legal principles provide a framework for thinking proactively about equitable participation. And when we share a common understanding of them, we're better able to respond consistently and in line with these obligations. And finally, if issues do arise, it's important to know that there are support and reporting options available. At McGill, for example, our office is a neutral and independent resource that provides confidential consultations about relevant policies, access to informal and formal resolution pathways like mediation or investigation, and referrals to relevant support services in collaboration with other offices on campus. And I know that most universities also offer these types of support services. Now, I know that this was a mouthful of information, so please don't hesitate to reach out if ever you have any questions. We have a general email address, which is omr@mcgill.ca. Now, with that, I'll pass it over to Marilou. Thank you so much.
I was muted. Thank you, Jad, so much for this presentation. I think this answers to many questions. Sometimes professors are like, well, to what extent can I accommodate and different things like that. And I think it's really helpful to have this basic to see what we can do and to feel a bit more safe in terms of legal aspects, even though we don't have all the expertise that you have. So thank you so much for sharing. That's really appreciated. So I did not mention it earlier today, but if ever you have questions throughout the webinar, you can put that in the Q&A section and we'll get back to it at the end of the session today. So if you're thinking about a question that you have for Bibiana or Jad now, just put it in the Q&A and we'll get back to it during the Q&A period with everyone. So now we're going to dive into the fireside chat portion where we have the panel conversation with our three guest speakers. Of course, they did so many things in their lives. I cannot say everything, but I just want to give you a snippet of their biographies because I think it's important for you to know what they bring to this conversation. So I will start by Maria Vera Ugalde, the person that led us to have this toolkit and this conversation today. She is a D2R-funded PI and an associate professor in the Department of Biochemistry at McGill University. Her research combines RNA biology, protestasis, and single molecule imaging to understand how cells adapt to stress and how these mechanisms fail in neurodegenerative diseases such as ALS and Alzheimer's disease. Since establishing her lab in 2019, her team has published impactful studies in RNA biology and stress adaptation, including work recognized with the Moderna Discovery of the Year Award. Thank you for being here, Maria. Come. Now I would like to introduce you to Maria's invaluable student that contributed to this toolkit and to this event today, George Wang. George is a D2R postdoctoral scholar in the biochemistry department at McGill University in Maria Vera Ugalde's lab, working on studying mRNA dynamics following cellular stress. As a person living with a moderate disability, he shares his lived experience to support accessibility initiatives across McGill University, including the Accessibility Strategy Implementation Committee. Welcome, George. And at last but not least, I would like to introduce you to Catherine Roy. She is the Accessibility Advisor in the Office of the Provost and Executive Vice President's Equity Team since 2021. With a focus on capacity building, systemic change, and disability pride, Catherine works with stakeholders across campus on accessibility-related issues to ensure access to the built environment, equitable education and employment, accessible information technologies, and inclusive policies and programs. Welcome, Catherine. All right, so we're going to start the conversation with Maria. So Maria, when you contacted me, you had different challenges that led you to have this conversation with me. So can you please share some of these challenges that led you to talk to me?
Yeah, so well, first I would like to thank you all for being here. This is a very important conversation to have. I'm very grateful to be part of it. And the reason why I contacted Marilu is because I wanted to make my laboratory accessible for the second time. And I realized that I don't have the knowledge. I don't have maybe sometimes the resources, and I didn't know how to ask for things without invading maybe the privacy of the trainee who was applying to the lab. And I also think that sometimes I was overstepping or assuming things that, without being real. So this toolkit is super important. And it's very important because in the first place, it breaks the mental barrier that we have is, can I do this? Can I make my lab accessible? So if we have this toolkit, the answer is yes. I can do my lab accessible with keeping the quality of my science and keeping, like what my trainees have to fulfill. And I have the support. So now that there is a toolkit, I know that I'm going to have the support for the materials that I need, right? The support for the questions that I have, the freedom to ask them, and also if I'm using something that is helpful for me, why not contribute to it? I can be part of being and of making wet labs more accessible. So this is the message that I wanna provide. This is an important thing to have, and it's an important thing to contribute to, because we are not all the same, and we are not gonna all have to face, the same accessibility issues.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Maria. And I think just by you sharing this information, it normalizes different questions that other professors that are on the call or that will see the video also of this session today, to just know that it's normal to have these questions and to be able to find it somewhere. And one thing that I really liked in the way that you approach this conversation, because sometimes people say that if we're inclusive, then we're going to put aside the quality of the work, and that's never the case, right? When we do EDI, so really we can find ways to make our spaces more accessible and maintaining the very high quality of the work that we do. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Now, George, as being part of Maria's lab, what would you say? Sorry, I'm gonna start again my question. So, being part of Maria's lab, how do you feel about the fact that you have a PI that is really taking into consideration accessibility needs. What does that mean for you and to be part of this project?
Yeah, thank you so much for including me on this. And it's really a pleasure to be able to talk today. Yeah, and it's just personally just as an example, I've been really lucky to work with Maria, who's as you could I think tell by her statements, is very considerate, receptive, and gratefully took actually like a lot of initiatives to ensure that I had everything I needed to do my research. At all stages of the process. Um, and so I think, yeah, like this, in addition to having a formal accessibility toolkit, um, is a really excellent way to ensure that um, individuals with disabilities interested in working in research groups can um, uh, like I said, have what they need without a need to excessively like self-advocate and things like this, which can be quite exhausting if there's not as much help along the way in the process. So yeah, and I just also wanted to being a part of this project, I think I just wanted to echo a lot of the sentiments that have already been um, shared, but I think it's of course not really um, never the case where individual like PIs, lab supervisors or lab members are just like against accessibility initiatives or anything like this, but some things can sometimes just be overlooked or just not considered. And so I think, yeah, just having a toolkit and a guide is very uh, excellent for yeah, for a more holistic consideration of the process.
Thank you so much, George. And I think you highlight something important. Sometimes there's the good intention, but not really knowing how to approach things. And I hope with the toolkit that we've created together, that we could touch on these points, like you're saying. Now, Catherine, you've been the backbone of this document because really with your accessibility expertise, you really put a lot of meat on the different questions that we had. So for everyone, the toolkit is going to be divided in three sections. There's going to be a section on onboarding researchers with disabilities, another one on accommodating researchers and employees with disabilities, and creating a more accessible wet lab. So, Catherine, I'm going to ask you to maybe walk us through the key components of the first section about onboarding.
Thank you so much, Marie-Lou, and thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here and to be a part of this initiative. So yeah, let's get into the meat and potatoes, if you will, of this toolkit. And let's start with the onboarding process, because when we talk about accessibility in research, people often think about equipment and physical spaces and things like that. And those things are important, but one of the most significant opportunities to support researchers with disability actually begins earlier during the onboarding process. And actually it can start earlier than that, even in the recruitment process, but let's talk about onboarding. So a good onboarding experience can set the tone for whether someone feels, welcome, supported, and able to contribute fully to the research team, obviously. And one of the first things that we discuss in the toolkit is accessible communication. And this doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as ensuring onboarding materials are available in accessible digital formats. For example, maybe avoiding PDFs and using Word documents instead, things like that. Or providing written instructions in addition to, verbal explanations, or sharing, expectations and procedures clearly and consistently. These practices help researchers with disabilities, but they can also benefit everyone who is joining a new lab or a research group. In the toolkit, we also encourage supervisors to discuss accessibility needs early. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to ask people to disclose medical information, but it's rather about creating opportunities for conversation and making it clear that support is available. So something as simple as including a statement in an offer letter or in a welcome email that highlights, the lab's commitment to accessibility, can help signal that these conversations are welcomed and expected. And it can really make quite a difference. Another important principle is building flexibility into research environments whenever possible. So research work often includes a variety of activities, right? Laboratory work, data analysis, writing, literature reviews, et cetera, et cetera. And not every task needs to be completed in the same way at the same time or in the same location, often anyway. And sometimes relatively small adjustments to scheduling or task allocation or work processes can remove barriers while maintaining both safety and research integrity. And finally, in this section on onboarding, we talk about inclusive lab culture. In many ways, culture matters as much as physical accessibility. An inclusive lab culture is one where people avoid making assumptions about what someone can or can't do, and where accessibility questions are discussed openly and respectfully, and where researchers feel comfortable asking for support when they need it. One example I often give is that when a challenge arises, the first question should not be, can this person do the work? But rather, what barriers might be getting in the way and how can we address them? And that shift in perspective often opens up possibilities that may not have been immediately apparent. So the toolkit is built around a simple idea. Accessibility is not something that happens after a problem emerges. The most effective approach is to think about accessibility proactively as part of how we design research environments and communicate with team members and support participation from the outset. So ultimately, accessibility research environments are not just better for researchers with disabilities. They are often, clearer, more flexible, and more inclusive for everyone.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for offering all this information about onboarding, because it's true, sometimes people might think directly about the tools, but there's so much more that we can do, and in very simple ways with all the examples that you've presented, honestly. So thank you so much. And George, I really liked in us preparing the document together, you've mentioned, well, accessibility actually starts even before the onboarding process. So can you please walk us through what that means concretely?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, as Catherine said, there's a lot of you know, these considerations in the onboarding process. In terms of like before, there's a couple of main, I think, preliminary events prior to actually starting employment. So firstly, there's of course actually seeking the lab in the first place. So in this regard, I think it's important to like try to convey one's lab philosophy of making everybody feel comfortable about reaching out and applying to the lab, especially if it's one that is not like within your existing network. So just as an example, this is something that's relatively easy to implement on like a lab website, for example, which is a primary avenue of seeking a potential group as a interested researcher or student, is to have, like Catherine mentioned, like a welcome statement or a statement of equity, for example, like in the lab members homepage or tab, to encourage like not only persons with disabilities, but any individual, regardless of gender identity, ethnic origin, etc., to apply on the basis of sort of scientific merit or interest, rather than having to worry about anything else. And so yeah, secondly, I think there's just the actual interview itself, which yeah, in this case, it's quite helpful if a PI or a recruiter is like sort of actively seeks out if there are any accessibility considerations that could be potentially implemented, such that throughout this whole process of deciding or discussing about actually joining the lab, somebody doesn't have to worry so much about like what are if there are any problems or concerns that they may have prior to actually even joining during this whole process.
Thank you for sharing that very important piece. In the toolkit, you'll see there's like a box to really prepare for before the onboarding process with the details that George just mentioned. So we can be very cognizant when we're preparing the offer on the website and also throughout the interview. Now, the idea with this toolkit is for us to be able to print copies of this toolkit, and it could be accessible really on the desk of supervisors in labs. So it can be consulted to by any people in the lab. So Maria, knowing that yourself, you're a supervisor in a lab, how do you plan to use that printed copy of the toolkit that will be on your desk for the onboarding process?
I hope very efficiently because it's gonna, I think that especially in our lab in which we sometimes think a lot about things, right? And in a wet lab and in research, many times you go your own way of thinking with, with the knowledge that you have and the way in which you process things. And many times we go to the literature to see if that has been discovered or how someone has go around something. So I plan to open it a lot of times. So I think that I'm gonna use it because it has an answer to many of the questions that I have asked myself several times. And I can also use it, or I plan to use it to see if where my brain or my way of doing things go is really the way in which things should be done, because I don't know about everything. I have never been in an environment in which I have to deal with in a personal, or a professional situation with someone with a disability. So many times you come from your heart or your actions. So this, I think that this booklet is a very good, like subjective
Yeah.
platform to consult.
Thank you for sharing that. And really, the toolkit has been really developed around Maria's question. So really for PIs, this is the way that Maria is describing. I think it's really a nice way to be able to benefit as much as possible from this toolkit. And now we'll dive into the second section of this toolkit that is about accommodating researchers and employees with disabilities. So Catherine, can you walk us through the key components of the toolkit?
Sure. So there's a section in the toolkit on accommodations. We talk about trying to create a more accessible environment for everyone, but sometimes, there is no standard solution, and we need to accommodate someone directly. And so we have to think of the idea that an accommodation is an individualized process. And so, for example, two people with the same diagnosis or the same condition may require very different supports, while people with different disabilities may benefit from similar accommodations. So rather than focusing on the person's medical condition, as I said earlier, it's usually more helpful to focus on the barriers they're experiencing and what support would enable them to participate fully. So, for example, one researcher may benefit from adaptive equipment in the lab, while another may require flexible scheduling to manage fatigue or medical appointments. And the second principle around that is to focus on essential tasks rather than established ways of doing things. When an accommodation request arises, a useful question is always, what is the essential outcome that we're trying to achieve? And sometimes there are multiple ways to accomplish the same research objective. For example, if a researcher is unable to spend extended periods of time, standing at a lab bench, the question is not whether they can stand all day. The question is whether the work can be completed safely and effectively using a tool and, a stool or adjustable workstation or, another type of approach. And finally, how we respond to accommodation requests really matters. The goal is never to have all the answers immediately. The goal is really to engage in a collaborative problem-solving process and responding promptly, listening carefully, avoiding assumptions, and involving the individual who needs the accommodation in identifying solutions is often the most important first steps. And many accommodations are simpler and less costly than many people initially expect. And when there are additional costs or support that's needed, there are resources that can be available either through institutional accommodation processes. For example, I manage a central accommodation fund where we can pay for different types of equipment or different types of accommodations. And ultimately, the accommodations are not about, we talked about this really briefly just earlier, but they're not about lowering standards. They're about removing unnecessary barriers so that people can contribute fully and, while maintaining safety and research integrity and excellence. And one way I like to put it is accommodation is about access to excellence, not about exceptions to excellence.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherine. And I think it really gives us some fuel to have these conversations around accommodations. But some people might be hesitant still to have these conversations. Of course, as Jad mentioned at the beginning, no one has to disclose about their diagnosis, but knowing about certain accommodation needs can actually help. Like in our initial conversation that we had, Maria, we spoke about how it could be beneficial to have some of that information. So can you please share some of the benefits of knowing about the accessibility needs of your research team members?
Yeah. So I think that what Catherine says is very well said. It's about breaking barriers, and the reason why a trainee is welcome to the lab is not, the lab is a work environment, right? And our duty is to train our trainees to be excellent, right? So you want to keep that excellent, but also the duty of the trainee is that the trainee is providing something, is providing a background knowledge, is providing a different perspective, is provided a different background in terms of, like the undergrad or the graduate studies that they have done, right? So you want to have a good group, right? So there are two things here. I don't want to invade, like the personal, status of the person or the student who is coming here, but I also need what barriers I have to break. And on the other hand, the student needs to know how we operate, not only in terms of, the microscope, the tissue culture, how we operate, but also how team members work together to have a functional lab. So this has to be a very open conversation, and I need to know what the student needs, and the student needs to know how the lab operates. So together we can make the place a better place, and together we can make good science, a good team. We can progress in the student career, we can progress on how the lab is doing, but that conversation is needed. And it also needed because for the PI in this case, it can save a lot of mental and emotional energy. So if something is not accomplished, it's not accomplished because you don't have time, because I didn't provide the resources, because I'm exhausted your physical and your mental activity. So I also don't want to exhaust all my mental and emotional energy questioning if I'm doing things right, if, this is for this reason, this is not for that reason. So we all have to get to some standards, right? We have to break the barriers, and that has to be very clear, right? And then we go all full speed, with the excellence of the research. But that needs to be discussed. And not one time, like we can accommodate.
Mm-hmm. It's true, not one time. We say it multiple times in the toolkit that we can check in at multiple times to have these conversations. And I really like how you talked about breaking the barriers and collaborating because that's truly what we want to do. And now when we say things like that, sometimes after the event, people are like, oh, but I'm not sure how to have the conversation. So now, George, I would like you to maybe walk us through the do's and don'ts of having the conversation about accommodations.
Yeah, thanks. So I think there's like this overarching theme that Catherine mentioned that like accommodations are like really highly individualized. So yeah, like in there we've talked about discussing things early. And with that said, I think even if accommodations are implemented at the very beginning, they can evolve like in the first few weeks or even beyond that. Like individuals might need to actually try new equipment before seeing how it works for them. Some disabilities are as well like progressive. Um, so I think, yeah, like in terms of the dues, there have been already a lot of good ones that were mentioned by Catherine and Maria. But one thing I could potentially possibly add is that just to like be kind of a bit fluid, like even past the initial accommodation discussion. So you know, I've personally I appreciate like check-ins every couple of weeks or so, or just to or just however, you know, however much is comfortable with like an individual's like mentorship style. Because yeah, sometimes uh individuals can be like there might be some hesitance to like constantly, I don't know, ask for things, I guess, for like worry of being burdensome. That doesn't apply for everybody, but yeah, and I guess like in terms of the a couple of other things on the flip side, I think it's always important to like try to not make assumptions about an individual's abilities. So I think like it sort of goes both ways. So like wheelchair users might prefer to like use lab equipment actually normally and just sort of have and ensure like there's enough like things are at the right height and there's enough space and things like this. Some disabilities might also be more invisible. So for example, like individuals with chronic pain or something that's more mental health related might like just have some days where it's just hard to be as productive. So just the cognizance for that aspect as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this and for making this whole content more accessible to apply to everyone in our conversations. Now I'm mindful of time. I see there's like 10 minutes left, so it's possible that we'll extend maybe a 5 minutes more for this conversation just to be able to get into the last section of the document before the Q&A. So the last section of the document is specifically about having a more accessible wet lab. So Catherine, can you walk us through the key components of that section?
Sure. And yes, I am mindful for time too. So I think I won't go into all the details and I'll just leave you with a couple of key ideas. So the final section of the toolkit focuses on creating a more accessible wet lab. And when people hear that phrase, they often imagine, you know, major renovations and expecting expensive equipment. And while those things can sometimes be necessary, accessibility is often influenced by many smaller decisions about how a lab is designed, organized, and operated. So in the toolkit, we talk about, you know, physical access and layout. We talk about ergonomic equipment and lab equipment and different tools. And I won't go into the details of that, but the toolkit is very exhaustive on the things that that are suggested. And you know, we talk about the sensory environment because you know many labs can be challenging on that front, and so we offer some solutions. I do want to highlight one section in particular, which is safety and emergency procedures, because often, you know, a common misconception is that accessibility and safety are competing priorities. And in reality, they are not. They're really both concerned about, you know, ensuring that people can participate and work safely. And so, for example, having emergency procedures that should consider whether, evacuation routes are accessible, whether alarms are both visual or auditory, et cetera, et cetera. That can really help, lab users that might have some disabilities on that front. And so the question is not really, whether safety should be compromised. It's really rather whether accessibility considerations have been meaningfully explored alongside safety requirements. So I just want to demystify that part a little bit. And finally, the toolkit talks about clarity itself as an accessibility measure. And in fact, some of the most effective accessibility measures are not, physical modifications at all. They're really about improvements of how the information is communicated and organized. And if there's one message that I would leave you with regards to this section, it's that creating a more accessible wet lab is not about designing for a single disability or a single individual. It's really about creating research environments that are flexible enough to support a wider range of people while maintaining safety, research integrity, and scientific excellence. So that's what I would leave you with for this section.
Thank you, Catherine. It's such a great exercise that you did to synthesize everything and to share in such a clear way what's in the document. So thank you for sharing that. And I would end this conversation with a question with George before diving into the Q&A. So George, at the beginning of the workshop, I mentioned that the Quebec's Week for Persons with Disabilities is really a moment where we raise awareness to act concretely to increase the participation of people with disabilities. And now that this lunch and learn is ending, what do you hope that researchers keep with them to continue implementing accessibility in their environments?
Yeah, so thanks. So I would say, like an ultimate underlying goal of all of this is to just enable lab members to focus on being able to do their research and without having to worry about the challenges that they may face. And like we mentioned, this kind of really applies to like all stages from joining to actually doing the work. And yeah, I think it's it's important to have create like supports for researchers. So this goes from like the relationship from with one's advisors, the academic accessibility offices, and also, as was mentioned, the culture of a research group as a whole is quite important as well. So there's like all the little things that day-to-day things can really add up and make a big difference at the end of the day. Like for example, like I'm really lucky to just always be able to like ask anybody for help whenever, and to receive like a warm response from all lab mates. And so yeah, I think just to perhaps to close, I think just considering the objectives we've discussed today and putting them into practice, I believe it will empower individuals to reach their full potential in a research group. And yeah, thank you so much again, Mary Lou, for having me for the discussion.
Well, thanks to all of you. Honestly, I think it's such an important conversation. And really, I think we're starting something. We're not being perfect in this, but just to have these conversations, just know that we're there and we can continue to improve together. So thank you so much. And now I'll open to a Q&A period. You can put your questions in the Q&A section if you have any, or I think there's a possibility to unmute yourselves also, if ever it's easier for you. Oh, yeah, so my colleague from the comms team is saying that you can raise your hand so she can unmute you if ever you want to speak. Oh, there's a question here. Jennifer, Thank you so much for this wonderful and informative session. How can we have discussions about accessibility with those who may not be as receptive or not attend seminars like this? So is there someone that wants to answer to this question, to this spicy question?
I could maybe try. As accessibility advisor and as someone who's worked in the field for a long time, it's true that some people are not receptive, and it can be very difficult to get our points across or to get what we need. And I think that first of all, I think that one of the things that can help is to point towards the obligations of the institution. For example, in terms of we have obligations and commitments towards equity and accessibility, and we have a McGill accessibility strategy that's been adopted by Senate, and that gives a lot of weight to accessibility requests. So that can be one way of opening up the dialogue. I think also that bringing concrete examples of how that can look so that it can be demystified when we're asking for something. Sometimes people can say, "Oh my God, how big is that?" And just really being clear about what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve can be helpful as well. Sometimes these are difficult conversations, and having allies is also very helpful if you don't want to do this on your own, or sometimes you can reach out to, let's say, HR, who can accompany you into this process as well. And you can also reach out to me. But it's not an easy answer, and really it's, you got to try the best you can to but pointing towards legal obligations usually helps a lot. So I hope that helps.
Thank you for sharing that. Now that there's resources and there's so much work that you have done, specifically Catherine at McGill, I think we could benefit from that to push a bit the needle to get points across. Now, as we're ending the webinar, I'm sure you're waiting for the link for the toolkit, so I'm putting it in the chat right now. You can look at it. I'd like to thank my colleague Roberta also, who worked on taking the pictures in Maria Vera Ugalde's lab. Georgia was there also, and they showed different points where it was accessible in their labs through the pictures. And the graphic design was done by my colleague Roberta as well. So I'd like to thank her. I'd like also to share with you that at the end of the day or tomorrow morning, the latest, I'll share an email with you with the link again that you could share to other people. There'll be the recording of the session today if you want to share around, and there'll be an evaluation form. Of course, we tried something different this year. We wanted to go a bit beyond because Catherine and me collaborated last year on having a document on our webpage, and now we did something different with our conversation, and we want to improve ourselves every year. So if you can please complete the evaluation form, that would be super helpful. And really thank you so much to everyone who contributed to this conversation, to everyone on the screen today, and thanks mostly to all of you that took an hour of your day to make really our environment more accessible. That's super important. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye.